the request of James and John, the reaction of the other apostles, and Jesus' words, not just to them, but to you and me here this afternoon. Those are the three things that are on my mind. Actually, there's a fourth thing on my mind. It's a football game that happened yesterday, but it doesn't have anything to do with the gospel, and I can't figure out how to get it in there, so I'll just leave that to the side. But I don't mind wearing green today. First, the request of James and John. Before we get to what they're asking, let's just back up and ask another question. How do we even know about this? This is not exactly a proud moment in the photo album of James and John. This is an ugly glimpse into the interior of two of the pillars of the early church. This is bad PR. Not to mention, this is a private conversation between the apostles and Jesus. There's no press there. How do we know about this? The only way we know about this is because the apostles, that is to say the first bishops of the church, they wanted us to know about this. It's like James and John wanted us to know that when Jesus called them, they weren't saints. They weren't saints when they were walking with him. They weren't even saints after Jesus rose from the dead. The Gospels over and over again portray the apostles terribly. And the apostles wrote these, or at least they got these from the apostles. That's a significant thing for us to keep in mind, I think. The apostles over and over again in the Gospels come off obtuse, unbelieving, and cowardly. In fact, whenever I read a passage like this, I picture Peter and Mark having a conversation. Mark's gospel is written more or less at the dictation of Peter. That's what the church has always held. And I picture Peter describing a scene, and Mark's got his quill in his hand or whatever he's writing with, and he gets to a moment like this, and he just kind of goes, "You sure about this? Like, nobody needs to know about this. This is not going to make you look good, you know." And Peter says, "Yeah, I know. But it's not about me. It's not about us. It's about him. We're not putting this together so that we can boast of how wonderful and great we are. We're proclaiming this because we want to boast of what it is that God has done for us in Jesus. Put it in." The gospel today is in a series of really timely gospels that we've had in the midst of all that's going on in the church right now, as we read seemingly day after day about the incompetencies, the failings, the sins, and the crimes of some of the men who are leaders of the church right now. Just like the apostles, they aren't saints yet. But please God, like the apostles, they will become saints. And please God, you and I will become saints. That said, what are James and John asking for? They want power, right? They want prestige, privilege, places of honor. They want to be in the inner circle. They want to be in that group that feels so special because they're so close to Jesus. They want to be amongst the elite. That's what it means to sit at the left and the right of Jesus in his glory. They want to be the people who are in charge. And unless we think they're the only two misfits in this rather motley crew of the apostles, check out the reaction of the others. When the 10 heard this, they became indignant. Why? Because the other 10 were just such remarkable paragons of virtue. that they just couldn't fathom how James and John could be so worldly and so vain. I don't think so. They're upset because James and John got to Jesus first. They wanted power too. Most importantly, what is it that Jesus says to them, and what is it that Jesus is trying to say to us? Jesus responds to a really ugly and embarrassing conversation that's taking place amongst his best friends, men he has chosen personally to be the first leaders of the church, by saying this: you know that those who are supposed to rule over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. Jesus says, you know, that is to say, you are acquainted with this kind of behavior. You have experienced this, haven't we? All of us, in one way or another, where authority is exercised. You know those who are supposed to rule over. This can actually also be translated something more like this: those who suppose themselves important persons. Who suppose themselves important persons, meaning, of course, those who are not rulers, who aren't in the inner circle, those who are the ruled, well, they're not very important. You know those who are supposed to rule over, they lord it over. That is to say, they dominate, they tread on, they exercise complete dominion over, they try to overpower and to master and to subdue the people who are entrusted to them. These people, Jesus says, they like to make their authority felt. And in all this, Jesus is revealing to us what we all already know, at least those of us over a certain age, right? That those in positions of authority, at least in my experience, more often than not, they misunderstand authority as power. This is rampant in the political climate that we're living in right now, and it's not cornered by any political party. We even hear politicians say things as outrageous as this: I'm in charge, you're not, too bad. I get to make the rules. You don't like that? You can vote me out. Then you can be in charge, and you can make the rules, and you can do whatever you want. And that happens in politics, we see it in the church, we see it in families, we see it at work, we see it in schools, we see it in sports. Is this really what authority is all about? Jesus makes it abundantly clear that the answer is no. To all of this, Jesus says this: it cannot be so, or it shall not be so among you. But that doesn't somehow carry the punch that Jesus' words are intended to have. This is direct address right now from Jesus to his disciples, whoever and wherever we may be as we hear this gospel today. Whether that's a pope, a bishop, a priest, a dad, a mom, a teacher, a coach, a priest, anybody who exercises authority. Jesus says it cannot be so. You, I, cannot lead like that. Not if you're going to be my disciples. For whoever would be great among you, Jesus says, must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man also came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. I don't think this can be stated forcefully enough in the culture in which we live right now. Authority is not power. Power ends freedom. Real authority, true authority, is always in the service of others. It's always towards the promotion of the common good. It's always to help others find fulfillment. The Latin word for authority shares a common root for the English word that we translate as augment, which means to give rise to, or to increase, or to make greater somehow. Which doesn't mean that those who have authority are just supposed to let people do whatever they want. Any parent knows better than that. It just means that those who have authority need to remember that God gives authority so that those who are entrusted to their care, wherever they may be, at work, in a home, in a parish, in the church, in a country, wherever, the people who are entrusted to them thrive. So what should you and I do with all this? Let me suggest two things and then offer two questions that might be helpful for us to focus on in the week to come. First, I think it's crucial to just recognize that this tendency, this temptation to misuse authority as power, it's in every single one of us. We live in a world that often tends to divvy itself up between the us and the them. And we, of course, are not like them, right? It's those people who misuse authority, like the bishops, or the priests, or the CEOs, or the Republicans, or the Democrats, or the rich, or Michigan State fans, or Michigan fans, or whoever it is. It isn't us. It's them. No. There's no us and them. There's just us. And us is a mess. You and I belong to a race which, apart from God's grace, is stuck under the dominion, the rule of sin. And one of the many places, the most common place where this dominion of sin rears its ugly head is in the misuse of authority as power. Here's how Jesus says it in the gospel. Through his suffering, my servant, that is Jesus, rather this is the first reading, Jesus shall justify many, and their guilt he shall bear. Who are the guilty? We are. All of us. Every single one of us. Paul puts it this way in one of his letters to the Corinthians. Christ died for the ungodly. Get that, people? The ungodly. Who are the ungodly? We are. All of us are. It's important for us to have a humble, honest, sober estimation and understanding of ourselves. We all can do this, act in ways which are not in keeping with what Jesus tells us we must do. And so for those of us who can and have done that, the second thing I would encourage us to do today with regards to Jesus' words is repent. Not apologize. Repent. To repent means to acknowledge something and then to ask God and others to forgive it. This is an extraordinarily convicting gospel to preach on. As I've been praying with it over the last number of weeks, knowing this is the gospel that falls to me, I can't tell you how aware I am of the ways and times in which I've done the very thing Jesus condemns the apostles for doing. And so, for all of you, I want to repent of any and every way in which I've forgotten Jesus' words, misused authority as power, whether it was out of frustration or just my own sheer sinfulness and selfishness. I know this tendency is in me. But I call you all to do the same, because I know it's in you too. Because we make up this common lot that is the human race. And whether you're a coach or a teacher or a mom or a dad or an employer, we can all do the very thing that Jesus condemns. We can even do it as leaders of ministries in this parish. So with that, let me offer 2 questions to reflect on today and maybe throughout the week to help keep this in my mind. First, do I see myself, do you see yourself as a part of the common lot that is humanity? Or do I see myself, do you see yourself as apart from it? In other words, do we see ourselves as belonging to the us and that everybody is in the us? Maybe you haven't had the opportunity to abuse authority, but it's something that we all have within us, this desire and temptation. And second, if I am in a position of authority, whether I'm a dad or a mom or a boss or a teacher or a coach or a priest, what's one very concrete thing that I can do this week to put into practice what Jesus is teaching us in the gospel this afternoon, so that those who are entrusted to my care, whether it's children or employees or citizens or whoever they may be, they can flourish and they can thrive. May Jesus, the Good Shepherd and the model of all real, true authority, have mercy on us.